Many of you probably know what The Moth is. It's a nonprofit that's dedicated to the art of storytelling. And I'd like to share with you a story from The Moth from a few years ago. The woman telling the story is named Auburn, and I'm paraphrasing what she said a little bit. In 1992, she was living in Ann Arbor, Michigan, and one night she found herself curled up on the floor of her bedroom, which was filthy, in the fetal position, in excruciating pain as she went through withdrawal from a drug that she had been addicted to for years. In her agony, she kept folding and unfolding a little piece of paper that had a phone number written on it. Life had started off really well for her. She was raised in comfort and privilege. She was the kind of kid who had opera lessons, who spoke fluent French. Her parents paid for her college education. She spent a year abroad. She got a master's degree. She was, in her own words, pedigreed. And then in her 20s, she was living in Ann Arbor, and she began to notice poverty and injustice and racism, and that was a revelation to her. She was surprised that people who shared the planet lived so differently from the way she had lived, and she responded. But unlike some people who respond by trying to fix the problem, her response was to take all the privilege that she had known and, in her own words, destroy it, rip it in half, spit on it, set it on fire. Along came a man who would help her do that. He was older, charming, she was smitten, and a friend of his introduced them to the drug that they would become addicted to for years. And after years of using and having a baby and marrying the man, she found herself on this particular night curled up in withdrawal with a little piece of paper in her hands. Her mother, with whom she had not spoken for years, had sent it to her. It was the number of a Christian counselor, and her mother suggested that maybe she could call this person sometime. Finally, she was desperate enough to do that. She was covered in bruises, emaciated, in withdrawal. Her child was asleep on the bed, and she dialed the number. A man answered and said, "Hello," and she said, "I got this number from my mother. Do you think maybe you could talk with me?" She heard him shuffle and assumed that she had woken him up, and then he became very present and said, "Yes, what's going on?" She made the call at 2 in the morning and talked with him until the sun rose. He was very kind and gentle and listened well, and by the time the sun rose, she felt calm and she knew that she could make it through the next day. She was very grateful, and she knew the call was coming to an end, and she said she supposed that he was now going to tell her some Bible verses to read, and he laughed and said he was glad he had been helpful. And she said, "No, really, how long have you been a Christian counselor?" At which point he said, "Okay, I have been trying to avoid saying this, and I need you not to hang up, but you dialed a wrong number." As one commentator, Emily Towns, said, "The simple, basic acts of kindness we perform in genuine welcome of one another are all that God asks of us." It's so simple, isn't it? Sometimes kindness and welcome look like an unseen voice at the other end of a phone call. Sometimes kindness and welcome look like a cup of cold water. The catch is that it's easier to be kind and welcoming to some people than to others. There are some people who are just so very awful, it's hard to even offer them a damp paper towel, much less a cup of cold water. We can exercise our vast powers of judgment and discernment and decide if this person is worthy of our water or our kindness or our attention. But that is not what Jesus calls us to. I have figured out a bit of mental and spiritual gymnastics to help me overcome my prejudice and judgment, and I look for the lowest common denominator between me and the other person, and I'm pretty sure that's not what Jesus calls us to either. But still I try, and I think, well, maybe this person, like me, has been fired from a job before. Or maybe this person, like me, has lived with chronic pain from a body part that just won't work. And maybe this person, like me, is a parent and carries all the joys and anxieties and worries that parents have. But that doesn't always work. And sometimes the lowest common denominator I can find with another human being, and I'm a little ashamed to say this, is the sky. The ceiling over our heads that we share, the sky of blue and gray and black, these gilded, bluer than the ocean, spacious skies. When we were children, maybe we thought that heaven was up there and God was up there too, and looking up somehow connects us to God and how God wants us to live with each other, with kindness and welcome. I will always remember, I don't know if any of you were there, at an early meeting of the Interfaith Alliance on Poverty, when a church member talked about her own experience of growing up in poverty and how she now chooses to be generous with others. And someone asked her how she understood poverty, and she said, "Poverty is when you can't drink the water out of the faucet. Poverty is when you can't breathe the air. Poverty is when you have no community to turn to." It's so basic. We must breathe, we must drink, we must have others. Why pretend that others don't need the same things that we need? Following Jesus does not have to be all that complicated, really. Love, be kind, choose grace, feed the hungry, give water to the thirsty, love some more, stretch yourself. Give a hand up, whether the person you're helping deserves it or not. We are all in this together, although sometimes war and greed and politics and religion seem to be driving us apart at times. There is so much that we share. At its most basic, the air, the water, the land, and there is enough to go around. So if a sojourner passes our way and is tired and thirsty, how can we not offer a cup of cold water? And if the phone rings in the middle of the night, and by some small grace we realize that the stranger on the other end of the call is at the end of her rope, how can we not listen? Would we not want someone to do the same for us? One of my favorite commentators, David Lose, says this: "Following Jesus doesn't have to be heroic. Like all the small acts of devotion and tenderness and forgiveness that go largely unnoticed, but tend the relationships that are most important to us, so also the life of faith is composed of 1,000 small gestures, except that, according to Jesus, there is no small gesture. Anything done in faith and love has cosmic significance for the ones involved, and indeed for the world God loves so much." Or, as Mother Teresa said, "There are no great deeds, only small deeds done in great love." As a nation, we are in an ongoing conversation about what makes America great. And for me, one of the things that makes our nation strong and great is our history of generosity. I would guess that many of us here are descendants of immigrants who were once welcome to these shores. I think about the generous aid the U.S. showed the world over the decades. I think too about the generosity of freedom that we aspire to, all those complicated things rolled into the Constitution and the Declaration of Independence and the First Amendment, and the generosity of character that we aspire to that allows for dissent and debate. But I think too about small acts of generosity by people like my grandmother, who during the Great Depression, as she and my grandfather raised their 6 children, found a way to give a drink, if not an entire meal, to a transient passing by. And whether she did that because of her faith, or because of her sense of helping a fellow American in need, or simply because that's who she was, I don't know. What I do know is this, that we who have been given so much, the earth, the water, the sky, are called to give much in return. It's the least we can do. I want to finish with a poem by the Arab-American poet Naomi Shihab Nye, who tells a beautiful story of offering the least among us something in her poem, Gate A4. She writes, "Wandering around the Albuquerque airport terminal after learning my flight had been delayed for 4 hours, I heard an announcement. If anyone in the vicinity of Gate A4 understands any Arabic, please come to the gate immediately." Well, one pauses these days. Gate A4 was my own gate. I went there. An older woman in full traditional Palestinian embroidered dress, just like my grandma wore, was crumpled to the floor, wailing. "Help," said the flight agent. "Talk to her. What is her problem? We told her the flight was going to be late, and she did this." I stooped to put my arm around the woman and spoke haltingly, and here she writes in Arabic, and I'm not going to attempt that. The minute she heard any words she knew, however poorly used, she stopped crying. She thought the flight had been canceled entirely. She needed to be in El Paso for major medical treatment the next day. I said, "No, we're fine. You'll get there just later. Who is picking you up? Let's call him." We called her son. I spoke with him in English. I told him I would stay with his mother until we got the plane, and I would ride next to her. She talked to him. Then we called her other sons just for the fun of it. Then we called my dad, and he and she spoke for a while in Arabic and found out, of course, they had 10 shared friends. Then I thought, just for the heck of it, why not call some Palestinian poets that I know and let them chat with her? This all took up 2 hours. She was laughing a lot by then, telling of her life, patting my knee, answering questions. She had pulled a sack of homemade mamoul cookies, little powdered sugar crumbly mounds stuffed with dates and nuts, from her bag, and was offering them to all the women at the gate. To my amazement, not a single woman declined one. It was like a sacrament. The traveler from Argentina, the mom from California, the lovely woman from Laredo, we were all covered with the same powdered sugar and smiling. There is no better cookie. And then the airline broke out free apple juice from 2 huge coolers, and 2 little girls from our flight ran around serving it, and they were covered with powdered sugar too. And I noticed my new best friends, we were holding hands by now, had a potted plant poking out of her bag, some medicinal thing with green furry leaves. Such an old country tradition. Always carry a plant. Always stay rooted to somewhere. And I looked around that gate of late and weary ones, and I thought, this is the world I want to live in. The shared world. Not a single person in that gate, once the crying and confusion stopped, seemed apprehensive about any other person. They took the cookies. I wanted to hug all those women too. This can still happen anywhere. Not everything is lost. To the glory of God.